Welcome to Not Another CEO podcast. I'm your host, David Politis. Every week, we talk to inspiring leaders and get the true stories, the ups and downs, the lessons learned, and come away with actionable advice for our own journeys. Today's guest is a business and technology visionary who's been at the forefront of the cloud and SaaS space for almost 20 years. He took his parents' small managed services business and turned it into one of the largest and most successful cloud consulting companies in the world. His company has been named to the Fortune 5000 list 14 times. He's been named Partner of the Year by Google multiple times. He recently sold his business for over $500 million. Please welcome CEO at SADA, Tony Safoian.
David, thanks for having me. That's so complimentary, man. Thank you. Thanks for laying it on thick.
Well, welcome. We're going to jump right into the first question. So, what's the one thing you've done at SADA, big or small, that's had the biggest impact and that you'll absolutely do again if you're CEO of another company in the future?
Oh, that's a tough one. There's so many things. You make hundreds of decisions. It feels like every week. But I would say the thing I would absolutely repeat foundationally and fundamentally is focus. I'm a big believer in creating a category, picking a niche, focusing on something that's underserved to create a natural disparity between supply and demand in the market. And obviously that has a lot to do with timing. And anybody who's done anything big, you included, David, I'm sure you would include luck as part of everyone's story. So it helps to get lucky, as well as working really hard and making the right bets. So picking the right niche, I would say I would repeat over and over again.
So I love that because the number one thing I'm seeing with early stage companies I'm working with is lack of focus, because they feel like they have to attack the whole world to build a big business. So when you think about your experience, how do you choose what to focus on? And you've been doing it 20 years, and I would argue, over that time, I mean, you've evolved the business a lot over that time. But let's just go early days. How did you really choose what to focus on?
I think in the very, very early days, especially in a services business, it's completely natural to say yes to everything and to try a bunch of things to see what sticks, what the market truly needs. You want to discover your own talents as a company or as a leader around what you have a natural affinity for, a passion for, that you can provide exceptionally better than everyone else. So I think, that's okay to start that way and actually recommended to start that way. We certainly tried a bunch of different things, from, .NET application development to web design to, we talk about, voice over IP, things that were very early and not yet well established. We kept trying. And I think in the process of trying to find the right technology niche, simultaneously, we're trying to find the right business model at the same time. And ultimately, it led us to fall in love with things that were scalable and distributed. Cloud, for example, it's a service delivery model that solved a lot of problems relative to what we saw early in on-premise, systems and servers and platforms. We saw those, full of holes and full of problems, full of challenges, but also business models. We fell in love with a way to charge customers that had their best interest in mind around, managed services, fixed fee engagements, recurring revenue. We fell in love with those things. Anything that depends on a customer failing for you to make money, to me, is bad. For example, break fix, IT services early days. It was like, we're like literally waiting for, like, I hope a customer gets a virus so I can go charge to take the virus off. That didn't make much sense to me. Concurrently, that provided no predictability in terms of revenue. It's like, well, if a customer, if a hard drive crashes, then I have a job to go, fix the hard drive. So early days, we knew that that paradigm was flawed, and we very quickly moved to what was very novel at the time, which is like, well, let's prevent these things from happening, but charge for that preventative maintenance, right?
Mm.
So that was kind of the early days of what became kind of the de facto standard, which is managed services. But
Let me ask one question about the focus, because I think
yeah,
you've built the business into such a big business over time. Did you think that by being focused, you could get to this big of a business?
I don't think I don't think I could ever predict kind of the size that we got to, or that was not in the realm of possibilities for me. You know, me and my friends, entrepreneurs, we talk about this all the time. It's like very hard to build something you haven't seen a friend build, or a family member build, or someone in your community build, or someone in your circle build. So it's very natural to be kind of limited to what you've seen, you know. So we
Mhm.
didn't really envision that, but we saw so many other advantages to focus, like the ability to be the best in class at something, um, to have a market that is, you know, yours for the taking, right? For like a market that was fast growing but not well understood. Like I just think, you know, and you're right, we've done that over and over again. And when we've expanded beyond our core, it's always been in adjacencies, things that were close to what we're doing, that complemented what we're doing. But and we've gone back and forth. Like first it was like, we're really gonna focus on manage. We're not gonna do, you know, voice over IP systems, or we're not gonna do web development that's becoming commoditized. We're like, okay, we're gonna do cloud. And even there, you know, in 2019, the biggest bet we made was we're actually gonna sell the well-established, well-understood part of the business, which is the Microsoft business, and that was crazy. So at the time, it was perceived to be crazy by a lot of people, but we're like, oh my god, how can we narrow even further, right? Like that was a big gesture, and focusing even further on one of the hyperscalers, not all, and actually the smallest
Mm.
one
Mm.
that we saw, you know, the future of, where a lot of, you know, a lot
I
of
mean,
other
when you
competitors.
made that decision in 2019, so just for everyone's context, there was a Microsoft part of the business, Google part of the business, and you were a large partner for both. And when it was announced that you sold the Microsoft part of the business, I think a lot of people were, including myself, were very surprised. But from what I can tell from the outside, your growth actually accelerated after that. Back to this idea of focus. I want to key in here because it's literally a topic that I talk to people about. I would say daily now, and every time people say, no, there's not enough of a market. I got to do all of these things. I got to sell to security, IT, and the CFO. It's like you know, and versus, and you made that decision. And to your point, actually, as you got bigger, got more focused, which is kind of a ballsy move, frankly. But that does seem to have paid off.
It did, and look, it was not that, you know, Microsoft's, especially under Satya Nadella, because he was already there. It wasn't that like we didn't think that was a viable play or viable. No, it was like an incredible business. We're very successful at it. It was profitable. Um, and sometimes like the hardest things to stop doing are the things that are also working, you know? So it takes a tremendous amount of discipline. But what we saw in ourselves is that we were running two very different types of businesses, different models,
Mm,
different
mm,
capabilities were required. We had to actually silo and sort of replicate sales organizations because of the competitive pressure between the two platforms. It felt like two companies. So that was like, yeah, it wasn't like, oh, it's failing, it's easy to, no, it was actually, it was doing quite well. We're winning awards. We're on the main stage, you know, with Judson at Inspire. And so I think it's way easier to start doing things than stop them. And but I think over and over again, it's proven that it's the right thing. And
mm,
sometimes it's stopping them, sometimes it's actually cannibalizing the things that you do, which is long term very difficult. It's sort of the innovator's dilemma, classic case. Now there's tons, you know, books. There's a book about it,
mm.
very famous book. How do you? stop doing certain things that are successful? And then over time, how do you cannibalize the old business, old models, old revenue streams yourself before somebody else does? And I think
Mhm.
that's the continuous tension that exists, especially over very long periods of time. And another thing I'm sure you're coaching um, your clients and friends, etc., on is just like things take a very long time, and the true test of almost any business is withstanding and growing over not what you do in 1 year or 3 years or even 5 years. Like, what's a 10-year view of what you're trying to do?
One of the things I read your long LinkedIn post about your reflections on 20 years that you wrote a couple of years ago. And you talk about the cannibalization in the early days when you were moving to selling cloud email, cloud productivity suites. I like that part a lot because I was curious how everyone felt about. How did your parents feel about that? How did the team feel about that? Like, you were literally saying, we have a business, we've been doing it well, and now we're just going to get rid of that actually by selling the number one competitor to that business. Like, can you just talk
Yeah.
about that cannibalization moment?
Yeah, it was very, based on the very basic way. We're charging, X dollars a month to, you know, maintain email servers that were sitting in an office. And we're like, how would you like to get rid of this thing? Right? We will get rid of it for you and no longer be able to charge you X dollars because now that's living, at Google, that functionality is at living at Google and later living with Microsoft. And I think part of the reason we were able to do that is we were small ish relative to the competitors.
Mm-hmm.
Big established competitors have a very difficult time doing that. I think the preeminent example of that right now is like what Rackspace is having to do and navigate, right? They have a profitable legacy business and trying to build a cloud business. They've been trying this balancing act for like 10 years.
Yep, I was gonna say for a decade. Yeah, yeah.
For us, it was a little easier as far as like there's not a lot of sacred cows or big established things that were tangled into this old business, but not easy from the standpoint of like I know I have to give up revenue short term. I think that's easier to do when you have deep conviction
Mm-hmm.
on the model. Like it was actually abundantly clear to us as practitioners, as doers, that that's path A is the future and the current path is not the future. So again, we could try to build both, but it's like limited resources, focus being so important. It's like let's just put it all on the future because we have that much conviction that that's correct. And I think one of my statements on the reflections piece is like try to be on the right side of history,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to technology.
Let's talk a little. You built this business with, if I'm correct, no outside money.
Well, if you count like my parents,
Yeah.
second mortgage, back in the early 2000s, yeah. But outside of that,
And so what a lot of the people that I've interacted with, obviously for my last 10, 15 years, venture backed companies and, private equity backed companies, and you've done it without that for a long time. What trade-offs do you think you've had to make because of that?
I think, look, services companies are very different, like have a very different investment, payback horizon, cash flow needs. So I don't know if it's possible to do that in any product business, for example, right? But let's assume we're talking about certain kinds of businesses. Service companies have cash flow sooner; they can kind of manage the growth. So I think that obviously there are a bunch of services companies who have raised money, who start by raising money, and often that money is used for things like acquisitions. They kind of cobble together a few smaller MSPs or SIs and to kind of scale quickly. Um, we didn't have the benefit of that. We've only made one acquisition, and that was off the balance sheet, very small, like 3 years ago. Ended up being extremely strategic to have offshore capabilities. We bought a
Mm-hmm.
small company that a friend of mine started in India. But outside of that, like it was not a possibility for us. So I would say, had we known exactly what we're doing and has if all the timing of everything else worked out, of course, if we had raised money, I think we could have maybe scaled more quickly and grown more quickly. But I don't necessarily believe that's always a good thing. I
Mm,
think when you raise money, you tend to potentially be a little careless with your, investments, your portfolio management of your of your of your cash, for example, or your stack of cash.
mm,
I think being organic forces a certain level of discipline in focus, in portfolio management of investments, in how you grow to different markets. Like the first time we grew really outside of the West or SoCal, I literally sent one person from LA to New York and said, "You are opening the New York, business, right?" Because I didn't know anybody in New York. This guy knew what he was doing because he'd done it here for many years. I'm like, that's how we're gonna do it. I'm gonna get you this corporate apartment, and you're just gonna start selling in New York, and you're our first guy in New York. Um, and companies that raise money don't do that. They do some study, and it's like, oh, that's a good market. They like, great, we're gonna put 10 people there and see how it goes. And of course, that can work and has worked many times, I'm sure. But there's something to be said for having constraints in cash flow and
mm,
investment capacity that create discipline.
mm,
Now, we have again been good, very good about managing money. A lot of it thanks to my mom, who's still, by the way, post acquisition, just sitting right there, works in finance still. She was our CFO for a long time, very good with money. So we were always able to make small bets like that and more than one at a time.
mm,
But no bet that we ever made was in a category of like existential or
mm,
whatever, because we're just very, very careful with that. So there's also this element of when you raise money, you have a lot of opinions, you have maybe dissent of some kind between board members, shareholders. Certainly, me and my parents didn't agree on everything, but what I'd say is we always agreed on is like there's no debate about the future is cloud. Like my dad got that from day one. I didn't have to convince him, or that partnering with Google was a good idea, or that Microsoft Cloud was better than Microsoft
mm.
Exchange like none of those like strategic things we disagreed on. And I think most importantly, we never fought about money. Like it was never about I need to get my money out, or
Mm.
you know,
That's a big deal. That's a big deal.
right? Like there's somewhat of an unlimited investment horizon. And I think that's a very different set of decisions that you get to make if you're not like, well, I got 4 years and we got to do this, and so we could make whatever types of investment decisions we wanted. We could take as long as we wanted, as long as we were growing, as long as we are able to reinvest into the business, et cetera, et cetera. And they were also just very frugal by nature. And I think for a very long time, the way we competed vis-a-vis everyone else who started with us in these certain markets is because of the ownership structure, or maybe the philosophy around, is this a lifestyle business or is this a business we're
Mm,
trying to grow as
mm,
big as we can? Like people are just taking, they're seeing some success and just like pulling all the cash out of the business. Like my parents never really did that. We kept reinvesting back.
mm.
And that's something, again, you get to do when you're organic and self-funded. That's also luck. Like that's also luck that I got to do this with them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, that's um, one of the things with the services business in my limited experience with services is people basically is everything, right? Because there is the
Everything.
product is the people. What is the number one attribute you look for when you're hiring people for the team?
It's changed a lot generally, and I'll explain why. And again, this is the nature of being self-funded and working in markets people didn't understand, being a company nobody had ever heard of. Like our recruitment capability was not really world class, I would say, until maybe 6 years ago. We were fundamentally having to hire people that we knew, usually that were very young, that we knew that, had like the drive and the discipline and the hunger, wanted to do great things. I think that was the common set of attributes, but that didn't know anything about what we're trying to do. And we could afford to spend 5 years getting them to like 3 to 5 years to like best in class, best in the world of, what they,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the only people we could hire was like $30,000 people or $40,000 people. That's all we
Mm-hmm.
could hire. And we laugh about this now because the last 5, 6 years, we can, afford to buy the best, pay for the best talent in the world. Was like, that was just, I thought great people were so hard to find. Yes, if all you have is $40,000, but you need an $80,000 person, or yes, they're very hard to find. But as you can afford to pay for top talent, you suddenly like, wow, like actually, there's a lot of great people on the market. But I think fundamentally, and that has to do with I guess my work style, is I just need like drive. I need obsession with customer service, with outcomes, with I just need that high level of activity and thoughtfulness. Uh, People that uh, don't accept themselves making like unforced errors. Mistakes are fine, but unforced errors, like I don't have a high degree tolerance for. So those are like the attributes we would look for. I think later on, when we're in a certain position where it's like we got, more well known, this affiliation with this amazing brand and technology, which is very attractive to work in with Google and even Microsoft cloud technology, became easier to attract the talent. And then I think that those qualities still, remain. My executive team, all of them work exactly like I do. They're all driven. They all want to do transformational things. They all want to wow customers. They all want to be in there for each other. That's really important. I hate teams that feel like they're competing with each other or whatever. I think that's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Um, really work for each other, at service to each other as much as they are to customers. That's really important. But longer term, what it became like, you couldn't just hire people that just, loved the mission and loved you and your family and wanted to work their ass off for you. I think it's very important, and I'm so grateful we figured this out as a self-funded private company. Is how do you actually align incentives the right way? And I think that's one of the hardest things to do well, but it goes way beyond sales teams, which is maybe easier to do.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you make sure that, much like with your customers, if your customers win, you win? How do you make sure that if you're winning, your people are also winning? Should something happen, the people who helped us build this thing will also be tremendously rewarded. And I think if people know you're in it together like that, especially your leadership team, but really downstream, a lot of our people did quite well. If you were here if you were here in 2016 or before, and it doesn't matter what level you're at, like you did really, really well from this. And I think that's just really, really important.
Wow. You change people's lives. When you do that, that's one thing that I've seen from afar. I've known you for, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years. Is, to your point about the types of people, very different people early days versus later days, right? Early days, I don't think you could attract someone from a Google or Microsoft to come work at SADA. And then over the years, actually, I think from talking to a bunch of Googlers, they were itching to come work at SADA, which is kind of an interesting dynamic. My question to you is, do you think if those people came from the big companies, not just Google and Microsoft, but the big companies, if they came in the early years, would you still have made it to where you got to? Or do you think having those people grinding it out, you know what I'm at, you know what I'm
Yeah.
trying to ask?
No, totally, totally. No, I think there's absolutely this factor of, forget the fact that 10 years ago we were not the most attractive place for someone who has a great career at Deloitte or
Yeah.
Microsoft or Google, and forget about the fact that we can afford them. Um, no, it's a very different type of DNA, I think, and we had to get to a certain size and complexity for their talent experience of some of these people to even be a match. And even to this day, we've seen a lot of partners try to replicate the SADA strategy, and some of them were like, "Oh, it's easy. You just hire from Google." It's like, no, you don't just hire. And they think like anybody from Google, right? It's like, you work at Google. Like, no, yes, that helps. But like all those other things have to be true. You still have to be fast and nimble and engaged and hungry, and process is good, but you should be able to work outside the process. You should be apolitical in your work life. Like all those things still have to be true. And I actually think certain very big company people still to this day wouldn't thrive, in this environment. Although we've needed to, and I think we've done a really good job of bringing on those larger company experienced people over time. My executive team is to this day a composite of people that have been here, 11 years, and people that got here in the last 3 years,
Mhm.
and that mix is really, really important. But the timing of when they come in is super critical. And by the way, not everybody that came 11 years ago was also like still meant for this team. Um, we had a product spun out of the company like a quarter ago, and that's now co-owned by a couple of our OGs that were here 11 years ago, but they were no longer for this role to run sales at SADA, for example. No, Joe needs to go and like do something else, and he's going to have a lot of success with this product spin out. But you also have to be willing to do that, like change some of the people out. If the people are able to grow and push themselves, like I try to do every day, like be a little better, learn a little more, be a better CEO, better leader, better strategist, whatever. If people are willing and able to do that, yes, they can also rise, with the role
Mm.
as the demands of that change and become different and more complicated. But not everybody can. So you have to be, I think, as a leader, you've gone through this with your own leadership teams,
Yes.
I'm sure, many times. Is like some people are, great for 2 years. Some people are going to be great for 3 years. Yeah, some people can do it for 10, 15 years. It just depends. And then when you have to replace someone, it's very important to replace them with the right level of experience from the right size company. You cannot fit, a IBM strategy into a SADA typically, like it's not going to work.
So you talk about this, and the team has evolved over all these years, and people have stayed with it, new people have joined, but you've been at the helm for this entire period of time, um, and you've evolved a lot. As a
I hope
leader, I
so.
think, and um, how do you evolve? And when I ask that question, I mean, did you go out and get a coach? Did you just learn on the job kind of as you were going through it? Um, did someone give you feedback that said, "Hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z" from your team? Like how have you evolved? Because it is very different to run what you were running to
Yeah.
running. I don't know how big is SADA? 1,000 people? I'm not sure how many people.
Like 800
Eight
people.
hundred people. Like that's
Um,
a completely
yeah.
different. That's like literally a completely different job. So how have you been able to evolve?
I'm undergoing one of those evolutions right now because now I work for a public company, and that's totally different, David. Like, let me tell you, I've never worked for a public company, so now I have a material P&L part of a public company, different world. Um, so I think it's many many steps, but I think let me start with like the mindset required. I think the mindset required is you have to have strong convictions as a leader, as somebody like you have to believe certain things, but you have to be willing to let go of those beliefs as soon as better information is available.
Hmm.
You have to be consistently, perennially open to changing your mind, changing your approach, being wrong, feedback, feedback from customers, feedback from the world, feedback from your people, feedback from the leaders you trust. I think sometimes the more successful people get, the more closed off they get because they think like, oh, like this is working, so why do I need to change? And I've even had periods where I've operated with that modality, like I think you have so many years of success, it can lead to, ego can go out of control and all these things. Actually, I think it was I'm a philosophy major. As one of the Greek philosophers said, if you want to destroy a person, give them 20 years of good fortune, which is can be true. I think that mindset's really, really important. And um, so if you do that, you're going to look for, as a leader, manager, individual, it doesn't matter, like at any level, like how can I be, how can I improve the game? What are the gaps I see? What do I see? And what are the other things that I don't see, but others are telling me that I trust? So, I mean, one of the first basic things I did, like 2008, I went and got my MBA. Why? I was a philosophy major, like, love technology. I was starting to sell to larger organizations, and they all had their MBAs. Like, I didn't even speak the language of business, right? I couldn't read a P&L. I couldn't do an ROI calculation. So I went and did that. Then, a couple of years after that, I was like, okay, like I feel like I'm plateauing. I need to see and be around what we talked about earlier, right? Seeing what other people are doing. You have to be close to it. I joined an organization called YPO.
Mm,
That was also very good for me
mm,
for a while, where people were like raising capital, they were buying and selling businesses. They were all generally older, so I could see into the future. I could see good and bad, like the mistakes they made, personal and professionally, but also the wins they
mm,
had. Like that was a good learning experience for me. And at some point, I kind of also like felt like I outgrew that. And I think the way to keep it going is um, very important to hire people around you that have done things you haven't done, that have seen things you haven't seen, that have worked at bigger places, like I learned from my management team, my leadership team, all the time. So you have to surround yourself natively in that. You can't only get the learning from outside. You have to actually bring it in to your organization. All of my leaders are better than me in key areas.
mhm.
All of them are better than me at what they do. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't do any of what they did as well as they do. It's really important to do that. But I think keeping that orientation towards just reading tons, and it doesn't have to be just books, but just reading reading blogs, reading news, just like so you keep your pulse close to the action. Also, customers, talking to customers all the time. The leaders at these customers are generally all badasses, right? You're going to
Mm,
learn from their experience. They've all done great things. You want to develop close relationships where you're not only talking about your contract with them or your engagement with them. I'm learning from our customers a lot, and the more time I spend with the customers, the more I feel like is a real life education. And then I recommend this for everyone. Certainly has helped me. I think all leaders, all CEOs, uh, therapy, man. Therapy's great. I still, do it. I see my guy like once a month. There was times it was more frequent, but keeping a level head, keeping grounded, managing stress, self-care, discipline, exercise, diet,
mm,
especially as you become a parent, you're raising kids, that, dude. It's like the energy management required to be a great husband, father, and great CEO. Dude, it's like it's almost superhuman. So
mhm,
you have to behave as if you're training for the Olympics all the time, like
mm,
mentally, physically, like otherwise you're just not gonna can't be great at all those things. And we're trying to be great at all those things because it's not. It's a choice we've made. We decided to get married. We decided to have kids.
mhm.
It's like, okay, we got to play these three games really, really at the top level. I think that's like it's a fundamental belief that we need to get better every day. So what does that require? Open mind, growth mindset, humility, and then just a set of activities, whether it's formal education, whether it's certain groups, business groups, therapy, and just being a sponge, all the
Yeah.
time. That's what I think is required. But again, that is again the 10 or 20-year mindset that we all have to have, I think, if we're going to play the long game.
The community one is so interesting. You said it before, you said it again, of seeing other people build and knowing what's possible. I think that is, for me, every time we raised money from a new investor, and that investor maybe had a bigger network or bigger companies, kind of at the different stages, and I would be exposed to these CEOs who are doing hundreds of millions of revenue, and you're like, okay, it is possible. and
Totally.
that person is smart, good, talented, but they're not, some 10 levels above my capacity, and so I think that the YPO, I mean, people swear by YPO. I have not been in YPO specifically. I've been in other communities, but people swear by it, and I think it's exactly for this reason. That the one challenge that I've heard is usually those YPO groups they're small. You stay within that same group usually, other than the big events, and usually it's around the same size as you, versus seeing someone who's maybe 4 steps ahead of you, and you
Yeah.
can really. But the community stuff I love,
Yeah.
and the therapy stuff, as people have told me they have coaches and they swear by the coaches. Actually, when they describe the coach and what the coach
It's
does,
more like
it's
therapy.
actually therapy. Like,
They just don't want to say therapy. No, dude, it's okay.
it's interesting. Like, that's like, that so far everyone I've talked about coaches, I ask, and every person's answers, it's like, oh, that sounds like a therapist. So
And David, I don't know about you, but like culturally, actually I can assume, but culturally, certain cultures, man, that's just not a thing that our parents did or
yeah, yeah.
believed in, or like, it's like, like I'm sad. It's like, get over it, like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? Or whatever, right? So like I've become a big believer, not only myself, my friends, family, like it's a real thing. It's like a real science behind it. The human brain is extremely complex. And, for us, most CEOs, founders, etc., dude, the personal and the business, the time warp, the energy, it's so intermingled, man. You can't even divide one from the other. And if you're trying to be, someone you would be proud of in every role that we play in life, that's a very, therapy involved, I
Yeah.
think, science to figure out. And with successes or failures, success can ruin someone. Winning too much can ruin, like, for
Hmm.
all the time, can ruin someone. But so can taking a loss, personal or professional. Like, how do you go through all of that? I'm a big believer. And the community thing, totally right. I was fortunate when I joined, like I was on the smaller side.
Mm.
But at some point, again, I was too big, kind of too big. So that's like I couldn't justify the time commitment anymore. But dude, YPO was the first time I had a friend who sold a business for 9 figures. And a story, and it's like not about it's not the same as you read about it. Like he's telling you the play by play of how it went down. First time I had a friend who built a digital native company who raised money at a sick valuation. And also I learned, like, well, taking money from certain kinds of people is like he had problems, right? Like, um, I learned that, and it was like so much more than an MBA, and it was so much more than reading about it. But you're right. I was like, oh my God, he did it. That's possible. He did it. That's possible. How did he do it? Like YPO is very open, confidential, but
Yes, yes.
very open. Like people tell you everything. You're never going to get that reading in a book or studying it in a class. But any format that takes them, other people don't do that, but they have amazing mentors. The collection of people that are amazing, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, that have done crazy things, that will absolutely spend time with you if you're engaged with them a certain way. It's important to do that. It's just very difficult to do things without seeing that others have done it too.
Mm. Mm. What is, you talk about, failures and the impact that can have. What is the biggest challenge you've ever faced at SADA? Did you overcome it? How did you overcome it?
I think, I mean, there's been so many challenges. I remember there was a year that, first year ever that like we had a revenue decline year over year. I think it was like 2011, 2012. Wasn't, again, we were very careful with money. So we're never extended. We're never levered. So it was just like, that's weird. But it was like, oh, we need to build marketing capability and,
Mm.
source our own
Mm.
business. It was stuff like that. I think there was times when we would approach the market with too much arrogance, and that probably came from me, personally, like, oh, like we're unstoppable, and like we're the shit, and that kind of stuff. And I think that was more of a personal journey that I had to go through. probably like 7, 8 years ago. That was more for me, and like my leadership style, my attitude, I became hyper competitive and I wanted to win at all costs. And I was like not a nice person always, very, very ego driven. But I write about that because I think, you see some of these other leaders, many of them, on the news all the time, and you're like, wow, they're really, and they're like some of the richest people in the world, and we don't know what it's like to be like them. It's
Right.
very difficult to empathize, but we can be like, wow, like that's the extreme version of what's possible for all of us to experience when we have some success or great success, whatever. It's like we can all get into that modality of just being an asshole,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that is usually detrimental, self-limiting, damaging. We've seen cases where people have done that and have actually immediately
Hmm.
failed,
Hmm.
shortly after. So, and also failed on a personal level with their kids and their families and their wives, and, not just in their businesses. So I think it's important to, as I kind of the last things I write about in the reflections piece is like, yes, it's about you. It's all about you, but not in the way you're thinking. It's about you in that you have a tremendous amount of responsibility for hundreds of lives, for thousands of customers, families.
Hmm.
Like we have to stay extremely grounded and humble and grateful in gratitude about the responsibility we have to continue to execute and deliver, not just for our kids and family, but for all the ones that we're suddenly responsible for that we
Hmm.
didn't really realize comes with being a founder of a company.
So I want to transition actually to a little bit more about you. Where are you from originally?
I was born in Armenia during the Soviet times when Armenia was part of the Soviet Union. So I grew up in communism, like real communism. So when people are like, "Oh, that's communist," I'm like, "No, it's not." Like, trust me, that's not because I was born there. I know what that's like. And my family immigrated to Los Angeles in 1987. Very fortunate. Um, Not that life wasn't terrible. uh we had like food to eat and a place to live, and my parents had, my mom stopped working when she had me, but my dad had a job. But it was not at all like the land of opportunity that
Mm.
motivated my grandparents, my mom's parents, to leave 7 years prior to
After?
that.
Oh, prior.
Before, yes, a little set up LA for us. We came 7 years later, so soft landing, moved into their house, super easy. Not easy, but easier.
Hmm.
And but yeah, I mean, this is the place I think my dad was meant to be with his brilliance and his um ambition, which I think definitely I inherited. The ambition side, this is the place to do great things. That's why your family came here at some
Hmm.
point. That's
Hmm.
why almost all of us, like people who come to America, I hope to this day, it's always been, you're not coming here to chill. Generally speaking, you're coming here to like work your ass off and do something you couldn't do from the place that you came from. And definitely 1,000% the SADA story, only possible in America, maybe even only possible in the West Coast in some way.
Hmm.
I think the business culture is a little even more maverick out here. Like
Hmm.
anybody will give you a chance. Like, I've never heard of you, but like you do this thing, sure, I'll hire you once. There's no 300-year family doing business with family stuff going on in here in the West Coast as much. I'm a
Hmm.
little biased there, but maybe it's true.
Did you always know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur yourself? Like, did you want to be CEO of something?
No, dude, not at all. And uh, my dad and I still joke about this, but I'm an only child to immigrant parents, and again, much like certain cultures, it's like the expectation is that you take a very safe, highly respected path and for me, it was becoming a doctor was like the
Right. Of
path that was
course.
chosen for me.
Of course. Doctor,
uh
lawyer.
yeah, forget about the fact that like I hated biology and all of that, but I was good at math, good at science. But that was kind of sort of chosen for me. That's all I heard about my whole life, including like midway through college. But then I did a study abroad program where year 3 of university, you start taking real biology classes and all this stuff. But at the same time, I got exposed to other things like business and econ. I had friends who were studying different things. And technology is something I never really formally studied, but my dad's a technologist. He was like a mainframe data center guy. He was programming in Cobalt and Borland in the military back then, which is, compulsory service. He was a comms guy in the military. So I always had technology growing up, and I just loved it and learned on it. I was like, just that was my toy. That was my passion. That's my passion. Understanding of technology just comes from being around it. But I came back. I just had like I was like I don't like this stuff at all. I came back. I told my that I'm not going to become a doctor. I was 21, and he just like didn't talk to me for 4 months. And my mom was like, go figure out what you want to do. So I took a bunch of internships. Ended up at this .com in like 99, 2000, and I learned how to kind of do marketing there. I learned how to sell there. It was really interesting, like completely new things to me. And then, this is what happens, dude. I tell my friends who have kids now, like my dad told me not to go into technology. He told me I was too nice to be a businessman, too kind. And like whatever you tell your kids they cannot do, that's absolutely what they'll end up
Yeah,
doing.
yeah.
And also the irony of like I got to do with him.
Right.
Not only did I not become a doctor, like we built
Mm.
this, we saw it together. That's just how the universe works. So up until 5 years ago, uh, we joked. He's like, you should have become a doctor. But I guess now he doesn't say
Now
that
I
as
think
much.
he's probably exactly. Well, you now have your own family, obviously,
Yeah.
and kids and everything. And do they get exposed to SADA? Do they see that, or do you separate work
No,
and
my kids have been coming, by the office for the many, many years. My parents have pictures of them here when they were 4 and 5, and um they sort of understand or understood, and they're 13 and 11. Like they're getting more now. They get more now. I also have a 3.5-year-old
right?
who doesn't know anything, but but they kind of like, oh, you work, with Google, and they kind of like started to understand. But I think only in the last couple of years they started to understand the scale, and also like appreciate like what their grandparents did and what we did together and how
Mm,
fortunate we are. And you know how it is. Like it's these kids, their brains evolve a certain way, and
mm-hmm,
there's certain things you want to tell them, and or can tell them, or trying to figure out how to tell them. And
mm-hmm,
sometimes, and then like you have a 12-year-old then, she's 12, 13, she was 12, you know um and news breaks out, and she's like, Dad, what's this? Because public company, it's like, oh, I guess we got to tell them about the acquisition and what that means for our lives. So, but it's dude, super fortunate. I think they're growing up very different than
mm-hmm,
I grew up or Lana grew up, and certainly the way my grandparents grew up. So we're all trying to expose them in the right way to like what
mm.
all of this means, and is entrepreneurship a path that they're going to want to pursue or not? Like they have to evaluate all these things, but they're in the very early days of just understanding money and understanding business and figure out what they might want to do with their career. And we're in the early days of trying to figure out how to grow good, ambitious humans who are down to earth in in a very different environment than we grew up in.
Well, I think this
We're
is this is one of the things I feel like when I talk to entrepreneurs who are first generation, or you know, um, that and whose parents came here with nothing and built their way up and everything. It is hard because the exposure that we had, that I had to my parents who came here from Greece and from Israel, and their work ethic and their approach to life and everything, then my kids see our lives. They don't see that experience, and of course our lives are, like you said, very different. And how do you maintain, because I wouldn't have the work ethic I have, I don't think, without seeing what I saw, and modeling that. And then how do you pass that on when there's there's a different lifestyle and there's a different,
Totally.
and so I think about that. Honestly, I think about that.
It's sort of the biggest risk, and it's the biggest downside to to the success of,
Yeah.
at any level between generations is like, and we've seen it go well and we've seen it go badly, in which like the kids, like next generation, like is lost.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
don't have a strong sense of identity and ambition or meaning in their lives, and that's just very, very risky. And I think fundamentally it's important to, like, I can't we can't really obfuscate like
Right.
your success. You can't like hide. You're like, no, 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 like we're always gonna fly coach. Like,
Yeah.
no, we're not, right? We're just not. I don't think I think you have to strip away the money from everything else. You have to strip away money from meaning, money
Mm-hmm.
from ambition, money. And it's different. Like you and I worked our ass off early days because like we had to make money.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna have to find a different motivation that hopefully also makes money, but coming from a place of deep
Mm-hmm.
inspiration and mission that they have to find. And then if they're good at it and great at it and want to do it 20 hours a day, they can be very successful in it and make
Mm-hmm.
money. But I think we have to strip that away, which is not an immigrant thing at all.
Let me ask you actually to this exact point. What is the thing that that motivates you like deep at your core? What is it that has driven you? Maybe in the early days, maybe it was making money. Obviously, you've been doing this a long time, not to a huge scale. I think it probably passes that. Like what is the thing that gets you up every day now, 5 years ago? Like what motivates you deep down at your core?
I think it's just impact. I think I've never even measured early day success with money. It's always been impact. Can we be number one in this? What type of jobs are we able to create? What's the impact we're having on our customers? How's their life changing? Oh, the person who signed this SOW and we did this crazy thing that he bet on, like, did she get promoted?
Hmm.
Like, it was like just impact driven. How many customers can we touch? Can we win the global award? Like
Hmm.
impact. It's like if we're playing a sport, that would be a scorecard. No, there's not a public scorecard. Like you have to kind of make these up and kind of be like, what's the scoreboard that you care about? We never pursued as a family like money for money. I never pursued money for money sake. And I think that's maybe a fortunate mindset I got from my parents. And I think that's what I want for them. I want something that transcends, like, your parents, my parents, if they didn't work their ass off and made money, we would be in the streets. Okay.
Hmm.
Our kids are never going to know what that's like.
Hmm.
So they have to find something else that is even more motivational, more inspirational. Now, I think the benefit that we can pass on to them that our parents maybe didn't feel like they could pass on to you or me is they maybe have a little more time to figure it out and they can try more things. And I think that's a beautiful gift to give to our kids. They're not allowed to do nothing. They cannot be
Right.
bums. But if my 11-year-old, who's extremely talented, by the way, wants to see if she can get into Juilliard and end up on Broadway, she can try it until she's 23. and then and then do something else. Where our parents would have like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, right, right.
You're gonna be a stand-up comedian, or you're gonna be a dancer, you're gonna be an actor, like get the hell out of here, right? Like we'd be disowned, we'd be thrown out of the house.
All right, one last question for you. Knowing what you know now, if you could give yourself one piece of advice at the very beginning of your career, what would it be?
It would be, nothing is as bad as it seems and nothing is as good as it seems. So just make the most of every day.
Love it. Awesome. So Tony, if people want to find out more about SADA, connect with you, how should they do that?
LinkedIn's my favorite platform. Find me on LinkedIn, but also email me. I'm very good with email, tony@sada.com. Try to be responsive. I can't get to everything and everybody anymore, but I try. And but LinkedIn is a good platform, but also email, tony@sada.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. This was a great conversation. I've known you for a long time, and honestly, I learned a lot of new things today. So thank you very much.
It's quite an honor being interviewed by a fellow OG in the ecosystem. We grew up together in this space, and I'm really proud of everything you've done, David. Thanks for having me on, man.
Thank you. And for those of you listening, we covered a lot today. I hope you found at least one, if not many more things that you can take back and use in your roles at your companies, and would love it if you shared this episode with your network. So thank you very much, and see you next time for another episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. That's a wrap for this week's episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, please visit notanotherceopodcast.com. We'll see you next week.